Europe was left scrambling for new sources of gas when Russia's Gazprom turned off the taps in response to sanctions. Nations started pouring billions into securing liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to make up the shortfall. But has Europe ended up overcompensating? Welcome to Roundtable. I'm Philip Hampshire. Europe has been fast-tracking the building of infrastructure to take in LNG from the United States, Qatar and beyond. There was a real panic that without Russian supplies, countries like Germany would see industry closing down and homes left unheated because of energy shortages. But that never happened, and now the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis suggests that Europe has hugely overshot the mark and will have LNG capacity far beyond what is actually needed by 2030. So, is that a good or a bad thing? Joining us to discuss this from Barranquilla in Colombia, we have Ana Maria Jaller-Makarewicz. She's an energy analyst for IEEFA's Europe team. Meanwhile, Thomas O'Donnell is an energy and geostrategic relations analyst at the Wilson Center. He's based in Berlin. And meanwhile, in Dubai, we're all around the world today, Omar Bakir, market analyst at XTB. Ana Maria, let's start with you. Your report says that by 2030, Europe can have something in the region of double the amount of natural gas or LNG capacity that it might need at that time. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. What we realized after analyzing all the data, analyzing what the demand could be in the future, both of gas and LNG, is that perhaps the planning of the LNG terminals is not going in accordance with the forecasted LNG demand. And that's where we see a difference by 2030 if all the Repower EU policies come in place, that there will be more renewables, that there will be more energy efficiency, some demand changing on demand on gas. So that will have an effect on the LNG needed for the continent.
But this isn't a small gap, is it? You're saying that currently Europe has something like 270 billion cubic meters of capacity. By 2030, it'll have somewhere in the region of 400 billion, but demand will only be around 150 billion. That is a big, big gap. So you're thinking there's going to be a lot of overinvestment and a lot of wasted infrastructure.
That's right, but we have to realize that in certain countries in Europe, we already have that issue. And for example, in Spain already has less than 50% utilization rate in their LNG terminals, having one of them mothballed, El Musel. So there are already LNG terminals in place now without the new ones coming or being planned in the future, where we don't have the 100 utilization rate.
Now, if I go across to you, Thomas, after Ana Maria released this report, we had several comments come out from various different notables within the German government. One of the most prominent, perhaps, was Klaus Mueller, who's the head of the Federal Network Agency, which is one of the regulators there. And he said Germany's power crisis isn't over, and much depends on whether next winter would be colder than the last. This is a direct quote that he gave to a journalist at the Financial Times. The danger of a gas shortage is still there. It depends a lot on whether we continue to curb gas use and ensure diversified supplies into Germany, and there are risks. So how do you feel about this?
Klaus Mueller, he's head of the network agency here. By the way, Klaus Mueller is a lifelong Green politician. You have a Green politician saying, what are we going to, we need the LNG desperately. There's a war going on. I don't want to get off into that issue too much, but just to say the whole strategy right now is Putin knows he can't win. That he wants a long-term stalemate and let the energy and economic crisis in Europe grind. This is an energy and economic war going on. And there's a habit for a long time of certain people. There's a huge problem, no doubt about it, with global warming. Don't disagree. But there's a huge problem in that movement with a certain section of people in that movement of so-called analysts who always say, anything that isn't 100% renewables is wasted infrastructure because in X number of years, we're only going to have renewables. And this is a constant refrain. The same thing was said to me by one of the leaders of the Green Party here 8 years ago. She said, we can't use LNG to fuel heavy trucks and to fuel ships because in 10 years we'll be all electric and all the infrastructure will be wasted. Well, there's no heavy trucks and no shipping that's, electrified today, 8 years later. This is to me, it's an ideological approach. It's not a serious analytical approach. Let me just mention one thing. This thing with Spain, anybody who knows what's going on in Spain did the right thing, and so did Portugal. They knew that there was going to be this need for more gas in Europe, and they built the most number of terminals in Europe. It's stranded. There's no pipelines over the Pyrenees. They're having a fight with the French to allow there to be a pipeline over the Pyrenees. The German Chancellor Schultz and the Spanish Prime Minister stood together here in Berlin a few months ago, demanding that Macron allow pipelines to come up. We need this gas desperately. So to cite Spain as an example of an underutilized country, if somebody doesn't know about it, okay. But I think anybody who looks for a few minutes into the story knows what that story is. That's not an example of Europe overbuilding.
Thomas,
Europe better build fast.
Let me pass it back to Ana Maria. Ana Maria.
I respect very much your opinion. I did a very thoroughly analysis and report on Spain. So I feel very strong on my points of what I'm saying. And I think you answered, you supported what I said. There was a lack of planning. I'm not saying, I'm electrical engineer and I know we need energy. I'm not saying we don't need it. I'm saying is we have to be cautious on the investment. There's a very fine line between being reliable and being redundant. And that's where I think we need proper analysis, detailed one, analyzing it, checking everything. Spain didn't plan properly before building those pipelines, thinking, where are we going to send that gas to? So that's what I'm thinking. They decided to invest without analyzing how that gas was going to go. And actually, I tell you, it's 50% unused capacity. We can say, okay, one terminal, two terminals, but even there's El Musel that since 2013 has been mothballed. It has never been into operation. So what we are saying is we need proper planning. We are not saying we don't need LNG. We need it. It's going to come. We need it in the short term, in the medium term, but we don't need it maybe as much as it was thought initially last year.
Omar, I'm going to come across to you because the view of the world's LNG market looks remarkably different from the Persian Gulf, whether you're in Qatar or in the UAE or you're in Saudi Arabia, than it does for the other guests across in Europe.
Okay, so basically I have two perspectives for the subject. First perspective is that it could be a strategic move. As we all know, the geopolitical problems that are occurring over there in the region, it could be a smart move or maybe just a strategic move to acquire as much as possible from LNG products. This is one. And at the same time, I understand the FOMO, the fear of missing out that might occur, which can cause some sort of a panic for the users. Therefore, they try to acquire more and more LNG. However, at the same time, I have to agree that there is a lot of places, countries, regions that can offer such a product. The prices, the techniques, the ways might be different at a certain point, but yet it's not a rare product that we are talking about. So at this point of the conflict, I think that at a certain point, they will have to reconsider their decision, or else if we are talking about the markets, we could see some fluctuation in the prices because as far as we know that once the demand starts increasing, this can cause fluctuation in the prices related to the markets.
Thomas, part of the problem that we have here is that Europe needs the LNG now, if you like, but putting in the infrastructure in order to allow Europe to be less reliant on Russian gas, whether it's LNG or whether it's pipeline gas, that's going to take 5-10 years for it to come through. Is that not the issue here? The bottleneck is now, it's not a decade from now.
Well, that's a matter of analysis. I would say it's both. Look, Europe was getting a huge amount of natural gas from Russia by pipelines. That's not going to happen anymore. Even if Russia turns around and offers it, Europe simply, even the Germans don't trust the Russians now on this and are building LNG terminals as fast as they can. We have a problem here in Germany, for example, that most of the heavy industry that was energy intensive, 3 of the biggest chemical companies, basically the CEOs gave a warning to the government a little over a month ago. If you can't guarantee me some replacement for cheap natural gas that was coming from Russia within 2 or maybe 3 years, we're out of here. We're not going to be investing until we see that there's that guarantee. The biggest one of them, BASF, they have one of the biggest chemical facility in Europe, and Ludwigshafen here. They're cutting up parts of it and shipping it to Louisiana where there's cheap natural gas. This is a severe problem for Europe. They need to bring in all the natural gas they can quickly. Now, I have to say, what Ana Maria is pointing out is interesting. If the EU follows all its plans for Repower EU, if they meet all their targets for all the renewables, without getting into all the weeds of this, they've been setting targets for renewables, and she mentioned efficiency improvements. They've been setting targets for this stuff for years, and the targets simply are not met. And today, with all the bottlenecks in supply, they're not going to be met. We have a crisis in Germany where they can't install anywhere near the amount of windmills that they need to meet their targets. So yeah, if they met all their targets and replaced everything with renewables in 10 years, you wouldn't need the LNG, but it's just not going to happen more realistically. And this is a way of arguing that a certain part of the environmental movement has taken up. The government has decided on these targets. When these targets are met, all this other stuff will be wasted. But meanwhile, who said the targets are realistic? I mean, and they were ever met.
Well, if we look
It's
at
a
what's...
way of arguing.
Hold on, Thomas, because if we look at what's been going on with European natural gas demand over the course of the last year, if we go from August late last year through until January of this year, the European Union's experienced something like a 19.5% decline in the amount of natural gas that it consumes, primarily because they've been clamping down on efficiency and making sure that people use less gas. So doesn't that meet the stopgap you're talking about?
Look, Germany has been under severe pressure, industry and homes, but industry for 15 years, 10 years, to clamp down on efficiency all that is possible, and the country never meets anywhere near its targets. This has been going, and so how much more efficiency can you clamp down on? That's the thing. A lot of this, it's called demand destruction, was not voluntary. It was aluminum smelters now leaving the country. It was BASF that I mentioned at the biggest chemical plant. They're not going to be making ammonia anymore. Ammonia is the basis for fertilizer here and many other industries. They have to leave. And there's others. There were places that make glass that had to close their furnaces for periods of time. Right now, some of it is coming back online, but the aluminum I mentioned and the ammonia are not coming back online. They said they're going. So it wasn't just efficiency in that way. It was real destruction of capacity. And they're worried now. Biden is suddenly giving, all these subsidies, tax subsidies to industry in the United States. And a lot of the European industry, including the renewables, is running there because we have an energy crisis that no one sees the end to this until maybe 2026, 2027, when the new American supply of LNG almost doubles and the new supply similarly in Qatar almost doubles, and that'll be 80% of the new LNG on the market. Qatar and the United States new LNG is desperately wanted here, but everybody else wants it, from Pakistan to India to China. So this is a very difficult situation, and it's part of a war.
Let me take this across to Omar for a second.
Doesn't make any sense.
Omar, this could actually be quite good news for the nations around the Gulf, because initially you look at it and you say, well, hang on a second, this is going to cause havoc in the LNG market, which is going to be upsetting for Qatar, is going to be upsetting for the United Arab Emirates. However, both of those countries are also major aluminium producers as well. They have other secondary industries that provide value added based on burning natural gas. So could this be a net benefit to them, or is the market turbulence it's going to cause in LNG going to be an issue as far as you're concerned?
Well, I don't think LNG is going to be an issue. This is one. Second of all, if we're talking about benefits, like economical benefits or stuff like this, I think the Gulf region has already so much going on recently. Like they have projects that will create more and more tourism. They have natural resources. They have so many things that can generate a steady or let's say a wealthy income, a wealthy economics at this point. So basically, I don't think it's gonna be adding anything else. However, we have to take into consideration that the more the demand and supply, whether it was from Europe or from Gulf, the more the demand and the supply were going up and down, this can lead to price spikes in the market worldwide. So therefore, especially now we are seeing that we have other issues like the banks in the US and in Europe. Now, I don't want to expand on this point because it's going to take us to another topic, but sticking to the topic of the LNG, I think the more this issue or these plans that Europe has for acquiring more and more LNG, it's going to cause some fluctuation and disturbance in the market. However, I don't think it's going to be adding that much benefit to the Gulf region because they already have so many things going on. Especially, they have plans like KSA and UAE. They have plans for 2030, 2035. They have real estate construction, so many things they have their heads focused in. So, yeah.
Ana Maria, I want to come back to Spain for a moment because you mentioned it earlier. Repsol, the largest energy company in Spain, they have a plant over in New Brunswick in Canada. It had been an LNG import terminal, and they were asked, are you going to convert this over and make it an LNG export terminal so you can take LNG out of North America and take it across to Europe? And Repsol obviously went off and they did a feasibility study on this and they determined it was far too expensive and it was a waste of time. Now, when she was asked about this, Ursula von der Leyen said, well, what we really want out of North America is not LNG, it's hydrogen power. Does that mean that if a large amount of excess LNG capacity is put in Europe, it's not going to be wasted, it'll just get converted over in 10 or 15 years to hydrogen or some other fuel capacity?
Hydrogen, there's a lot of issues with hydrogen. Initially I thought was a great idea. Then when I started reading more and analyzing all the costs, and I found other studies like IEA that they did studies on hydrogen, then it realized that it's not easy to transport hydrogen. It's not like a known technology yet. It's expensive. Repurposing LNG terminals to transport hydrogen is not just straightforward. Then you have to change a lot of parts on the terminal itself, and it's very expensive. But I think the most important thing of all this is that the hydrogen demand is still not clear yet. There are some niches in places in Europe where you have hydrogen. What I would suggest, if it's possible, is to produce hydrogen locally where it's needed. I think that could be more efficient than thinking on transporting it long distances where the technology is still unknown. We need it in certain industries, in certain places, specifically in Europe. So we should target those places specifically.
Thomas, I'm going to come across to you. I've got a comment here from Fatih Birol, who is the head of the International Energy Agency.
Namely, the weather next year may not be as favorable as this year. Plus, China is coming to market with its all financial muscles to buy LNG from the markets, which is already very limited. I am worried about next winter. I think it is not right to be relaxed. It is not right now to celebrate without thinking next winter.
Thomas, based on those comments from Fatih Birol, the issue here doesn't seem to be capacity as it is right now or a shortfall right now, whether there is one or there isn't. It seems to be a worry about we've got no buffer. There's no buffer stock. we've got no insurance policy if things get bad from here. Is that correct, or are we still in a shortfall right now?
Look, I can answer it this way. Putin's energy war on Europe, he knew that Europe didn't trust him, was going to slowly, there's no sanctions against taking gas in Europe, there was against oil. And Europe was going to slowly cut off the gas because they don't trust him. He knew he was going to lose the business, so he cut it quickly to do the most damage, and it did great damage. Now, Europe, he never expected that the 27 countries would unite in this way and share the gas, and that the American imports of LNG would double, which meant there wasn't new production. It was being taken away from Asia, and that's what Fatih Birol is talking about. We were lucky because China had this extreme lockdown situation, and they weren't keeping the LNG that they had ordered, and were reshipping it to make money to Europe. And the Europeans, especially the Germans, were willing to pay anything for it. And so they pulled it away from all other markets. You couldn't even get a bid if you were in Pakistan and many African countries. It all got sucked into Europe as part of their defense against the energy, the cutoff of the energy by Russia. So Fatih's absolutely, Dr. Birol is absolutely right. We were lucky also, the weather was unusually mild. So there wasn't this crisis because extra gas was diverted from the United States. It was diverted from China where it wasn't needed, and it was unseasonably warm. Next year, we could have a terrible crisis and there could be rationing. And what I'm trying to say is that could still go on as far out as probably 2026 or 2027, because that's when all the new Qatari and American gas finishes coming online. And until then, there'll be this problem. But even then, there's going to be huge demand. China has plans to suck up much more LNG. They have to get away from, they're building a coal plant a week. They have to get away from it because of the pollution. Whether they care about global warming or not, they have protests about pollution. And they've made this commitment. So it's going to be tight for a long time, and Europe's got to get the capacity to import it.
Thomas,
it's got to be produced.
Let me bring Ana Maria in. Anna, I'm going to use a slightly different quote from Fatih Birol here. He said, and I quote, "Being overconfident for next winter is risky. Regardless of whether you're correct and in 2030 Europe might have twice as much capacity as it needs in LNG, the problem is everyone's running around like a headless chicken right now, isn't it?"
I think that's what, I'm very pleased of maybe even the people opposing to the report and commenting, some of them in favor, in contract against it, is because what we mainly wanted from the report is to like Europe stop a little bit and analyze, like from the outside, how quickly they try to fix the problem and run into the building of all these LNG terminals, and just stop a little bit and think properly and analyze the future. So yes, we think for 2023, we're going still to have a big demand, and we said that in the report. But from there onwards, we are expecting, knowing what we know today, that the demand will come down. As we know, the weather sometimes plays in favor or against us.